Under the weight of a quiet dusk, when shadows stretched long across the garden wall, his cat returned home. At first glance, it seemed she carried what she always did, a stray kitten, helpless and mewling, tucked carefully in her jaws. The man, accustomed to his cat's odd rescues, leaned closer with a soft chuckle. But this time, the truth stopped him cold. The tiny creature she laid at his feet was not an ordinary kitten. Its fur shimmered golden with faint rosettes, its paws too large, its amber eyes burning with a wildness no domestic cradle could tame. It was a leopard cub. His heart stuttered in his chest. For a moment, silence pressed heavy. He glanced at the cat, who sat proudly, tail curled around her paws, as if expecting praise for her find. The cub mewed again, fragile and desperate, wriggling against the man's hand when he reached down. The contrast between the fragile wildness of the cub and the calm domesticity of his tabby was surreal, almost dreamlike. He scooped the tiny body gently, feeling its delicate bones, its trembling heartbeat, its scent of grass and dust. The man's thoughts spiraled. Where had the cub come from? Was its mother nearby, searching frantically for her young? Or had it been abandoned, the victim of hunger or poachers? A leopard in his arms, delivered by a common house cat, was unthinkable. Yet the evidence purred and whimpered against his chest. His cat rubbed against his legs, as though demanding he accept this new family member as naturally as she had. That night, a decision weighed heavy on him. To leave the cub outside was to condemn it to death. Jackals, hyenas, even starvation would claim it by dawn. But to take it in meant walking a line between compassion and danger, between the safety of his home and the uncontrollable pull of the wild. He prepared a basket lined with old blankets, placed the cub inside, and watched as his cat curled around it, licking its ears, her green eyes gleaming with fierce protectiveness. Against all odds, the cub began to knead against her belly, seeking warmth, and she accepted it without hesitation. In the days that followed, the man lived in a paradox. He fed the cub with milk warmed in a bottle, watching its strength return. Its cries grew louder, its steps more confident, its wild gaze more piercing. Yet always the cat shadowed it, guiding, grooming, teaching in her quiet feline way. Neighbors who peeked through the fence gasped when they saw the spotted coat, whispering stories of omens, of danger, of miracles. Some begged him to call the authorities. Others warned that keeping such a creature would bring ruin. But when he looked into the cub's eyes, he saw not a threat, but a fragile being stitched to him by fate. Then came the night when truth crashed against myth. A ranger knocked at his door, called by villagers who feared for their children and their goats. The man hesitated, torn between the law and the bond that had already formed. Yet as the ranger's flashlight swept across the room, it revealed a sight that even hardened men of the wild could not ignore. The house cat curled protectively around the cub, her small frame shielding him as if he were her own. The ranger paused, his sternness softening into something like awe. The truth was undeniable. This was no ordinary rescue. It was a story of instincts crossing boundaries, of nature bending its rules. A domestic cat had carried home a fragment of the wild, and in her devotion had bridged the space between house and savanna, between fear and love. What began as an impossible accident had become something larger, a reminder that the language of care is universal, and that sometimes the smallest creatures carry the most extraordinary truths. The cub grew swiftly, as if the days themselves hurried to carve muscle into its frame and fire into its gaze. Within weeks, its paws no longer looked clumsy but powerful. Its rosettes darkened into sharp contrast, and its amber eyes began to shine with a fierce clarity. Yet still, it followed the house cat with the devotion of a child shadowing its mother. When she padded across the courtyard, tail flicking lazily, he trotted after her, his steps softer but his body larger with each passing sunrise. The man often stood in the doorway watching, half in wonder, half in fear, his cat and the leopard cub moving together like mismatched kin. By now the cub's hunger had grown beyond the bottle. He craved meat, sniffing the air when neighbors' chickens clucked or when fish smoked on the fire. The man, uneasy but unwilling to betray the trust that bound them, brought scraps from the butcher and placed them in a dish. The cat, ever the ruler of her small kingdom, sat nearby as he ate, hissing softly if his wildness surged too quickly. The cub obeyed her in ways he never would have obeyed a man, lowering his head, blinking submissively, as though her authority bridged even the gulf of species. But the village around them was restless. Whispers travelled faster than the wind. Children pressed their faces to the fence, desperate for glimpses of the spotted stranger. Elders warned that trouble brewed. "A leopard is no kitten," they said. "One day its blood will awaken, and then what? Will it devour the chickens, the goats, the man himself?" Their voices carried suspicion, and suspicion attracts danger. Already, some muttered of calling hunters to take the cub away. One evening, as twilight bled across the sky, the man sat outside with the cub at his feet. The cat sprawled on the step. He stroked the cub's back, feeling the strength of the muscles rippling under the fur, the hum of a purr deep as thunder. He spoke softly, though the cub could not understand his words. "One day you'll have to choose where you belong." The cub lifted his head, meeting his gaze with a steady look that was neither tame nor entirely wild, something in between, something unsettling in its depth. That night, a test arrived sooner than expected. A pack of stray dogs prowled through the village, lean and desperate, snapping at garbage heaps. They caught the scent of the cub, and drawn by instinct, pressed against the fence with snarls and yellow eyes. The house cat arched her back, spitting, her small body rigid with defiance. The man shouted, waving his arms, but the dogs pressed closer, claws scraping the wood. The cub, who had been watching in silence, suddenly rose. His body lowered into a hunter's crouch, tail twitching. A sound tore from his throat, not the playful growl of a kitten, but a true snarl, low and guttural, that froze the air. When he leapt, it was not clumsy. His paws struck the earth with precision, his jaws snapped with terrifying force, and the stray dogs scattered, whining, tails between their legs. Silence returned to the courtyard, broken only by the ragged breaths of the man and the wide-eyed astonishment of the cat, who brushed her face against the cub's shoulder as if to claim him all the same. The man stood trembling, torn between relief and dread. The cub had protected them, yes, but the power he had unleashed was a glimpse of the predator he was destined to become. And in that moment, the man realized the question was no longer whether he could keep the leopard. The question was whether the leopard would ever let go of them. The cub's strength became impossible to ignore. By the time a year had passed, he was no longer a fragile orphan, but a predator in full bloom. His body rippled with muscle, his paws silent as shadows, his shoulders rising above the man's knee. At night, the sound of his breathing filled the courtyard, deep and resonant, no longer the soft purr of a kitten, but the steady rhythm of the wild. And yet, he still pressed himself against the house cat, sprawling in the same basket he had once fit into, though now his long limbs spilled over the edges. She licked his ears as if he were still small, and he closed his eyes, yielding to her. The man's neighbors had grown uneasy. Chickens had gone missing from nearby yards. Goats bleated nervously at the scent of him drifting through the wind. Though the man swore the leopard never touched livestock, suspicion sharpened like a blade. "You cannot cage the wilderness in your courtyard," they told him. "When the hunger comes, no loyalty will save you." The man felt the truth of it gnawing at his heart, though his eyes betrayed only love when they fell on the spotted creature sprawled in the sun. One late afternoon, as the horizon burned with red light, the cub padded to the edge of the garden wall. His head lifted, nose twitching at the breeze, where scents of antelope and wild hares drifted from the savannah beyond. For a long time he stood there, tail curling, muscles coiled as though the earth itself pulled him away. The man called softly, and the cub turned back, his eyes glowing with something ancient and untamed. He leapt down, settling once more by the cat's side, but the man knew the boundary between home and wilderness was thinning with each day. The turning point came with the storm. Thunder cracked across the sky, lightning split the air, and the village goats panicked in their pen. In the chaos, a hyena slipped through, gaunt and desperate, its laughter echoing like broken glass. The villagers shouted, scrambling to chase it, but the leopard was faster. He bounded over the wall, his body a flash of muscle and fury, and collided with the hyena in a blur of claws and teeth. The struggle was short, brutal, and final. The hyena fled, bloodied into the storm, leaving the leopard standing tall, chest heaving, rain streaking across his rosettes. When the villagers gathered, torches flickering against the storm-dark sky, they saw the truth laid bare. The cub was no longer a cub. He was a guardian and a danger. Their eyes held fear and reverence in equal measure. Some wanted him gone, others whispered he had been sent as a protector. The man stood between them and the leopard, torn by the choice clawing at his heart. He could not deny what he had seen, the wild beating in the leopard's chest, a destiny too vast for walls and fences. That night, as rain softened to mist, he sat beside the cat and the leopard in the dim light of his home. He stroked the cat's fur, then reached for the leopard's powerful neck, feeling the steady pulse beneath. "You don't belong to me," he whispered. "You belong to the wild." The leopard leaned into his hand, rumbling deep in his throat, as if to say he understood. The cat, ever unyielding, curled between them, purring as though the bond she had created could never truly break. The man knew the time was coming. The leopard would have to leave, or the village would turn against him. Yet even as the storm clouds cleared, he also knew something else. When the day came, a piece of the wild would remain forever at his doorstep. The morning of parting came without warning, as such moments often do. The sky was pale with dawn, the air heavy with silence. The leopard, now grown into a magnificent young male, stood once more at the garden wall. His body stretched long and powerful, rosettes glowing faintly in the early light. He looked outward, nostrils flaring, the savannah calling with sense of prey and freedom. This time, he did not turn back at the man's voice. The house cat was the first to move. She padded toward him, tail high, her small body dwarfed by his frame. With a soft brush of her face against his chest, she marked him one last time. He bent his great head, pressing his muzzle to her fur, closing his eyes. It was not a farewell between predator and pet, but between mother and son. She had given him more than survival. She had given him belonging. The man approached, heart heavy, his hand trembling as he touched the leopard's shoulder. "Go," he whispered, his voice breaking. "The wild is yours." For a moment, the leopard lingered. Amber eyes locked on the man's, something deep and wordless passing between them. Then with a silent leap, he vanished over the wall, his body swallowed by the tall grasses beyond. Days passed, then weeks. The man and his cat sat often by the wall, watching the horizon. Sometimes faint tracks appeared in the dust near the edge of the field. Broad paw prints pressed beside the delicate prints of the cat, who still wandered there. Other times, distant roars echoed at night, low and haunting, and the villagers hushed their children, saying, "He is still watching. He remembers." And seasons turned. The leopard carved out a territory far from the village, becoming a shadow of the wild. Yet he never touched their herds, never prowled their pens. Instead, the village lived in an uneasy peace, guarded not by fences, but by the legend of the cat's leopard. Travelers came and went, carrying the story beyond the fields, telling of the house cat who had brought home a fragment of the wild and raised it as her own. In time, the cat grew old, her steps slower, her fur silvered. She still sat by the garden wall each evening, staring toward the horizon as if expecting him to return. And sometimes, when the sun bled into the earth and the air smelled of dust and fire, the villagers swore they saw him. An enormous leopard, standing at the edge of the savannah, amber eyes fixed on the house he had once called home. He never entered, never crossed the boundary again. But in his stillness, in his watchfulness, there was recognition. The cat passed peacefully one night, curled in her basket. The man buried her beneath the old tree, whispering words of gratitude for the miracle she had brought him. And the very next dawn, a roar rolled across the land, long, deep, and mournful, carrying over the fields. The villagers said it was a farewell, the leopard honoring the mother who had made him more than his blood. Years later, even after the man himself was gone, the tale endured. Children still grew up hearing of the cat and the cub, of the bond that defied nature and stitched two worlds together. And when the wind moved through the tall grasses, rattling like whispers, some said it carried the echo of purring and roaring woven into one. For legends do not end when the flesh fades. They live where memory and love meet. And so the story always closes with a single truth. Somewhere beyond the savannah's edge, beneath the endless sky, a leopard still walks with the heart of a cat.